facial. And let's go over the general points that we learned the last couple of days and bring it down. So the Maamar is based on the pasuk in Sukkot. You should dwell for 7 days in order that all future generations should know that I put you in Sukkot when I took you out of Mitzrayim. The meaning of the word Sukkot means clouds. Hashem put us in clouds, protected us with clouds for shade. And in a similar way, He commanded us to be in the sukkah, a sukkah that's built to create shade. So the Rashi explains that. Rashi explains. Sorry about that, David. Rashi explains that the schach of the sukkah is created from the cloud of the incense of Yom Kippur. The cloud is like the shade. And on Yom Kippur, the shade is still in a state of concealment. You don't know what that cloud is about. And then on Sukkot, when you sit in the shade of the sukkah, you are having the full manifest version of what really happened on Yom Kippur. So, regarding the sukkah, the Gemara says you have to have more shade than sun. That means in sukkah there's also sun. Just there has to be more shade than sun, but there is also sun. So that means in Yom Kippur there must be sun too, because whatever happens on Sukkot is a revelation of what happened on Yom Kippur. So on Yom Kippur there is shade and sun, and on Sukkot is also shade and sun. What's the sun on Yom Kippur? What's the shade on? So we said that the shade in Yom Kippur is a torah, is the incense. So what's the sun? So the sun refers to the sacrifices. Regarding the sacrifices, the Torah says the sacrifices are meant to be a fire offering. A fire came down from heaven. There's a fire the Jewish people offered. This fire offering is the idea of the sun. Just like sunlight brings warmth, so too in the Bais Hamikdash, the fire offerings correspond to the sun. And just like in the Bais Hamikdash on Yom Kippur, the primary component was the shade of the incense, the cloud of the incense, not the sunlight, the warmth of these sacrifices. So too on Sukkot, the primary ingredient is the shade, not the sun. So what does that mean spiritually? What's the idea of why is the primary ingredient the incense, not the sacrifices? What's the idea of the shade being more important than the sun? And what does that have to do with us? So let's go back to the meaning of the word sacrifice versus the meaning of the word incense. Sacrifice comes from the word korban in Hebrew, comes from the word closeness. When you offer a sacrifice, you are bringing yourself closer to Hashem. You aren't just bringing an animal, you are also dedicating yourself. You're saying, I'm going to dedicate my faculties, my talents, what I have, my resources to Hashem. I'm bringing myself close to Hashem. The word k'teres has a different connotation. K'teres comes from the word connection. K'teres, in Aramaic, whenever there's a word kesher, connection, in the Torah, it's translated in Aramaic as connection. What's the difference between being close versus being connected? What's the difference between a korban and incense? So, when you're very close to Hashem, you're extremely close to Hashem, you're still an entity for yourself. Versus the idea of being connected means that you've lost yourself. It's no longer that you may be very close, but you still have your own identity. You still have your own separate identity from the one you're close with. You are close with them, but you're still not. I like the word smitten. You're not smitten with love for this person. You still have your own identity. It's not like this. There's a love that's constantly on your mind, and you can't stop thinking about this person. You're close with them, but you're still your own identity. So with the sacrifices, that's how it was. You came close to Hashem. It was something that was logical. It was a sacrifice, but a sacrifice that was motivated, was generated by a conviction of understanding. Because of your conviction, because of your understanding and feeling, you dedicated to Hashem what you have. So you still remained with your own identity, and that's why the divine response to the sacrifices was also a limited response. It does say in the Torah, it says, it's nachas ruach, it's pleasure for me that you've done what I've asked you to do. It's amazing, but there's a limitation. The sacrifices cause a revelation of godliness, but it's with a limitation. And when you're serving Hashem with love, but the love is because of your understanding, it's based upon logic, so then your love has a, it's not just that you're limited and you retain your own identity, but even let's look at the love itself, let's look at the feelings themselves that you're having. The feelings you're having are very personal, very subjective, very real, very animated, but it's not like you've lost yourself. You're feeling love. You're feeling excited about the one that you love. You are separate from the one you love, and you're feeling excited about the one you love. So that's the idea of the warmth. In the language of the Zohar, tukfa shalhuva derechemusa, the powerful flame of love. In the Karban model, you are feeling a very tangible, strong feeling of love, and it's tangible and it's palpable. But on the other hand, it's limited. It's how your feelings. On the other hand, Keteris is a whole different kind of connection. It's not that you're just close to Hashem, it's you're connected to Hashem. Connected to Hashem in a way that you're not an entity. And your whole being is just the fact that you're connected to the one you're connected to. That all you are is the one you're connected to. And your life is only about that connection. Until you and the one you're connected to become one. Shlomo Yochai said, my whole time that I've been connected to this world, I've been connected to Hashem. He does go on and say, I've been inflamed by Hashem, I've been attached to Hashem, but with Shlomo Yochai, the words inflamed don't mean the same thing as they do in the Karban model. Think about Shemana Esrei, for example. Shemana Esrei is in chassidus a higher level in many ways than Shema. Shema is about your feelings. You love Hashem with all your heart. It's a very strong feeling. With all your heart. That's a really high madrega. But it's still about how I feel. I feel in love with Hashem. I'm there. The Rebbe Rashab compares Shema to a child who hasn't seen his father for a while, and he sees his father from a distance, and he screams, "Father, Father." He's instead of yearning for his father, he loves his father, he misses his father, and he feels how much he loves his father. But then there's a state where he is face to face with his father. And when he's face to face with his father, he no longer screams. It's not because he has less love when he's face to face with his father. He has more love. But the love has completely consumed him. He's no longer identity of himself. He's no longer on the outside. He's now been taken by the love. He's no longer someone who loves. He is now, his whole being is just his connection with it. He's been overwhelmed with his feeling of love for his father. There's no longer a sense of identity of himself. That's what Keteris is. Keteris is that there's a connection. Not just you're close, but that you're connected. There's no longer any sense of self there. There's no longer a sense of feeling. When I say there's no feeling, I don't mean that there's no love. It's a love like, in chassidus it's called love like water. Love like water means that you don't have a sense of self in this relationship. It's more like you've been taken by this experience. It's a very strong feeling that you're no longer separate from the feeling. Like I was thinking about an art museum. Someone walks in an art museum and says, "Hey, wow, what an amazing picture!" They're not into it. If you're really into it, it's like, no, you're supposed to be, it's supposed to be merging with the art, whatever. Al Derech is that similar way. Shemana Esrei and Keteris and the shade of the Sukkah is about not just a closeness of Hashem, but that you're connected. In the difference between Karbanos and Keteris is also reflected in two other things. Karbanos were brought on the outer altar. The Keteris is brought on the inner altar. What's the difference between the outer altar and the inner altar? The outer altar in ourselves represents the more external part of the heart. The inner altar represents the deeper part of the heart. What do you mean the deeper part of the heart, the outer part of the heart? There's a part of your heart that's affected by your understanding. You understand, you appreciate, and because you understand, you appreciate, therefore you feel excited about the one that you understand, their greatness and their goodness, and you're animated by your understanding. That's the outer altar. The inner altar is a love that's beyond logic and reason. It's the inner part of the heart, it's not based upon logic. So there's logic, there is higher than logic, and then there's feelings below logic. So the outer altar is connected to the external part of our hearts, and that's the part of our hearts that is affected by the way we understand. I understand the greatness of the Eibishter, and therefore I feel love for Eibishter. that love that I'm feeling is limited, is based upon my understanding. The inner altar has to do with the inner part of the heart, which is beyond logic and reason. And that explains two things about these altars. The outer altar is where they offered sacrifices. What are sacrifices? Sacrifices, when you offer a sacrifice, you just offer one sacrifice. That sacrifice, you offer one cow, one sheep, that elevated all of the animals in the world. You offer vegetation, elevated all the vegetation in the world. You're elevating the whole world. So the outer altar is extremely beneficial because it has an impact on the whole world. You're offering a sacrifice here, and there's a major impact on the entire world. The reason why the outer altar is able to make such an impact is because the outer altar is in a place where there is a focus on God's plan about elevating the world. The inner altar is not about God's plan, it's about God. The inner altar is about a love for Hashem himself. In a way, the outer altar does more than the inner altar. The outer altar is about Hashem's purpose, elevating the world. But the deficiency of the outer altar is that it's in a realm where there is a job, where there is a role, where there is a plan, where there is Hashem's plan to create the world. We were discussing yesterday about the difference between the Rebbe Shabbos chassidim and our generation of chassidim. The parents Machkin al Shalom. Knew the parents? The parents said our generation is the best chassidim. Why? He said if the Rebbe Rashab would tell his boys, guys, make a summer camp, and have baseball and have basketball and have football and teach kids how to say Kama Tzalafa, they wouldn't be able to do it. Not because they weren't devoted to him; they were very devoted to him, but they were their service of Hashem was in such a level that this is so foreign to them to engage in the world in such a way that they wouldn't be able to do it. The role of the sphere of Malchus, the role of our generation, is to engage in the world in that way, and therefore the external part of the heart, which is about impacting the world, it's creating a tangible feeling that puts spring in your step, is very important. It's a mitzvah to have a fire in the outer altar all the time. The outer altar has a role, a very important role. The Torah says even if you're tamei, like the outer altar, like the fire in the outer altar. Even if Shabbos, like the fire in the outer altar. There has to always be a fire there, which means that Hashem always wants us to have an actual feeling. It says in Hayom Yom, the mitzvah of loving Hashem is like seeing a good friend. You see a good friend, you have all these thoughts in your head, all these problems in your mind. You see a good friend, all of a sudden you feel better. Why you feel better? Because you feel, seeing that your friend evokes a feeling of such love, you feel like, it'll work out. So that's the mitzvah of loving Hashem, it's to have that strong feeling. And even if it's Shabbos means you're connected to the intellect, and you may used to think I'm an intellectual, I'm sophisticated. I don't need to have this. I have a deep pleasure of godliness, of a Shabbos-like relationship with Hashem. I need to have a fire. I need to be excited. Like a friend of mine who was by the Rebbe on a regular Wednesday, and he said to the Rebbe on a regular Wednesday, he was excited, he was dancing, and the Rebbe said to him, "Good yontif," right out of nowhere. So that he created a that's the mitzvah. The Torah is saying to love Hashem, to put a fire in the altar, the outer altar, to have an actual feeling that puts spring in your step. That's a mitzvah. Outer altar, to have an actual feeling that puts spring in your step. That's a mitzvah. And even if you're sophisticated, you have to have it. You may say, "What if I'm tamei? What if I'm so good?" Sophisticated, you have to have it. You may say, "What if I'm tamei? What if I'm so good?" Hashem doesn't want my feelings. No, you're wrong. Even if you're tamei, Hashem says to have those feelings, and then what happens? Lo yisichbe. It puts out all negativity. Those positive feelings of love for Hashem extinguish all the negatives in your life. And all the negatives inside yourself. You're worried about all the impurity that's in you, and you're like, "Oh, Hashem doesn't want my love." The way to get rid of that impurity itself is by the fire. The more fire, the more passion you have in your Yiddishkeit in a tangible, down-to-earth way, the more you're cleansing yourself. That's how you're purifying yourself from all those negative tendencies, negative feelings. The fire puts out the no. Do not put it out, the Torah says. How do you put out the do not? With the fire. Do not put it out. Put out the do nots with the fire. So the verse reads, constant fire on the altar. Which altar? The outer altar. And if it's Shabbos, you're sophisticated, still need to have it. If I'm pure, you still need to have it. What about all the do nots, all the negatives in my life? The do nots will be put out that way. So that's the outer altar. That's the advantage of the outer altar. The disadvantage of it is that it's focused on the outside world. It's focused on a plane, a realm where there is a world. It's focused on a realm where there is a world. On the other hand, the inner altar is about a love of Hashem beyond logic and reason, a love of the essence of the soul. There is no, all there is Hashem. That's the inner altar. It's not about elevating the world. It's about just a love for Hashem beyond logic and reason. It's not that there's a disavowal that a person doesn't want to do what Hashem wants him to do, but it's just a different state. It's a state of love for Hashem beyond logic and reason. It's a state of connection. So that's the power of the sukkah. It is the shade of the ketores. This will help us understand another distinction between the sacrifices and the ketores. For the sacrifices, you could only use kosher things. For the incense, you could also use non-kosher things. One of the spices in the incense was this blood from a non-kosher animal, from the spine of this non-kosher animal. They took this blood, and that was part of the incense. All other mitzvahs only use kosher things. Your esrog has to be kosher, sacrifice has to be kosher. The incense was specifically something that used non-kosher item more. The incense had 11 spices. 11 is non-kosher. Why is 11 non-kosher? So the Rebbe Marash had a maamer which he would repeat every 2 or 3 years just to purify the air. He said this maamer to purify the air. One of the things he said in this maamer is, although the world, one of the themes in the maamer, although the world exists, it's not imaginary. However, there's nothing besides. Why is nothing besides you, besides Hashem? Because the main and the true reality of each thing is a godly energy that creates it. That's what everything is. If there's nothing besides, although the world exists, it's not imaginary, but nothing besides Hashem, because what's the main and the true reality of each thing? It's its godly reality. So that's true. We have to say that the 3 impure klippas, the godly energy which animates all non-kosher things, but we have to say that non-kosher things which get their energy from the klippa, the 3 impure klippas, the sitra achra, the opposite of holiness itself, we have to say that also gets godly energy. Because if it didn't have godly energy, how does it exist? So it does have godly energy, but the way it exists is the godly energy in it is called makif. It's like it's hovering above it. It's not hovering above it, it's in it. But it's called makif because makif means to hover. But it's the reason why that term is used is because the godly energy is inside something that defies it, that not just disobeys it. Hashem creates a reality that is bent on the opposite of God's will. Hashem creates a reality that does things against His will. Hashem creates non-kosher things. Hashem creates things which aren't kosher, situations which don't seem to be in sync with God's plan. So those evil things that God's creating, chassidus don't think it's like there's another force in the world besides Hashem. There's no force in the world besides Hashem. Hashem then creates some kind of other force that He's challenging Him. But what I want to say is there are things that God created where you could see in that thing that God created how it connects to its source. You could see how it has a purpose. You could see why Hashem made it. There are some things that now you cannot see why Hashem made it, but it's more like a riddle. Like, what in the world is this for? It's the exact opposite. So the creation of unholy things is more like a riddle. Creation of pure things, kosher things, is more like a parable. A parable has to fit the analog. You're learning a parable. You know the parable has a message. God created things in this world. So it's not godly things. Hashem created a physical reality. It's also something where godliness is hidden in it, but it's not like something which opposes godliness. You look at the things and you know that there's a godly purpose in these things. It's a parable, it has a message, it has a meaning. You don't know what it is, you have to figure it out. Okay, so figure it out. But it's not like the thing you're looking at is something which makes you shake your head and slap yourself on your forehead and like, what is going on over here? But Hashem created other things which do make you slap your forehead. He created a reality that is the 3 impure klippas, that is the sitra achra, it's the opposite of holiness. And the reason why Hashem creates those things is also for God's plan, but from our perspective, those things are more like a riddle. Like, what in the world's going on over here? So because those items are created with in a way that the godly reality in them is foreign to their properties. The properties of these things is that they go against godliness, that they're not about godliness, that they're about non-kosher things against God's will. That's the properties of these things. And because that's the properties of the items that God has created, so the godly energy in them is like something foreign to them. It's like it's an exile in them. It's like I think of this as like a soul which is which is in a gilgul, a soul which is in an animal. Certain punishments the Torah talks about where a soul has to come back as an animal or something. So when the soul is in the animal, the soul is not in control of the animal. The animal is in control. The soul is like in a little sack in this animal and just follows and just going along with the animal. There's no control. In a similar way, the godly energy in the unholy, it's in exile. And that's why it's called hovering over it. It's there fully, but it's like hovering over it in the sense that it's not revealed at all. You don't see any expression, gangas. You are left with a riddle. You're left slapping your forehead. So the power of the ketores, the power of the incense is, because the incense is not a connection to Hashem based upon the external parts of the part of the heart. Not a connection to Hashem based on logic and reason. Rather, the ketores is about an inner bond with Hashem beyond logic and reason. Because it's beyond logic and reason, it's because it has no limitations, therefore it has the ability to even transform the negative to positive, even to transform the klipa to kedusha. And that's why the ketores is created by that's what the ketores, the schacha, the sukkah, comes from the ketores of Yom Kippur specifically. On Yom Kippur is about tshuva. Yom Kippur is about tshuva from the deepest part of the soul. So because on Yom Kippur we're experiencing this deep connection to Hashem from the deepest part of our soul, the level of Yechidah, at that level, the level of Yechidah is infinite. And it's able to even transform the unholy to Kedusha. And that's why the Ketores has 11 spices and even has a non-kosher spice. Because through tshuva, like in ourselves, tshuva can transform our Avedas to mitzvahs, like that's in Tanya. When you do an Aveda, shalom, so that Aveda makes you feel more distant from Hashem, and that feeling of love you have for Hashem as a result of this Aveda is much more powerful than the feelings that a tzaddik can possibly have. And therefore that tshuva, that yearning you have for Hashem, causes the energy of the Aveda itself to be transformed to Kedusha. So it's in a pnimius alei that you're touching the inner part of your heart, and therefore it's able to transform even the Avedas to mitzvahs. That's why the ketores, which it's associated with this kind of connection, has non-kosher ingredients. Okay, we'll stop here.